On November the 15th, I presented a brown bag lunch session to the Department of Economics at the University of Ottawa. Lessons learned from the pandemic. I was asked if I could provide a recorded version of the chat, so here we are. Welcome to our virtual brown bag session. The pandemic really was a force-fed opportunity, emphasis on the force-fed. So I want to address innovation and how it's normally introduced into an organization, and why this was a particularly disruptive experience. Nonetheless, I'd like to describe why the opportunity of remote and distance learning gets me up in the morning. During the pandemic, I worked with a network of collaborators, helping them out, exchanging ideas, exploring techniques and technology. And I'll briefly discuss some high points from those experiences, as well as my top 5 pointers with respect to online lecturing excellence and best practices. The elephant in the room is evaluation integrity. And in chatting with the organizers of this session, they basically said that if you can't solve that, nobody wants to talk about online lecturing excellence. So fair enough. I started looking into that. It wasn't something that I worked directly on during the pandemic, but I have a few remarks to make, and then I'll have some recommendations on how lessons learned from the pandemic can be exploited for the future. So what is this opportunity? A paradigm shift is perhaps an overused word, but what it really comes down to is, are the yardstick shifting in a way that the internal operations and structures, business models, product offerings, and delivery mechanisms for education, are they changing significantly in the future? And I believe they are. So let's talk about the in-person post-secondary rite of passage. You move to a new city after high school and you live in residence or you rent an apartment and you commute to class. You sit in a room for a certain amount of time to absorb some material. You pull your all-nighters to get things done at the last minute and you form new social bonds. You exercise your newfound independence by partying a bit too late and getting into trouble or whatever. And this is really a kickstart your adult life model. And it's a time-honored rite of passage. But there are some downsides to this model. A lot of people just can't afford it. Can't afford the living expenses, the time investment, the ever-climbing tuition costs. And a lot of people's schedules don't allow them to attend class during the day if they're working or have childcare commitments. And it really doesn't fit mid-career retraining terribly well, something that is increasingly required due to structural evolution of the labor market. But the move to a different city rite of passage, that's not going away. There are going to be plenty of bricks and mortar universities and frosh weeks for many years to come. What the distance remote model allows for is a dramatic reduction in the transaction costs of the delivery of educational products. So it allows you to tap into best-in-class specialists, best-in-class lecturers, best-in-class assistants, best-in-class testing integrity specialists, best-in-class support personnel. Distance remote offers side benefits in terms of research collaboration, press engagement, symposiums, and conferences. You don't have to get on a plane every time you want to take in or deliver a talk. And virtually hosted conferences are much more common. That's going to continue. That's following trends in industry. Cost reduction opens up new socioeconomic brackets. If we can get the cost of education down to a level where lower economic brackets that normally wouldn't attend are able to reap some of those benefits, I think that's going to have societal benefits in terms of increased upward mobility. And as broadband access expands, it's really going to open up remote areas, rural Canada, international markets, and so on. Asynchronous lecture delivery provides the flexibility that decouples the schedule and location constraints and enables someone who's committed during the day to attend lectures on their own schedule. This is also great for providing supplemental or remedial material for in-person classes. Continuing education, summer school, co-op students, they may want to continue to take a course or two to continue advancing their education. And all of this plays in favor of stronger midlife educational opportunities. As automation and technical displacements continue to have structural effects in the labor market, we're going to need to address midlife retraining much more effectively. Let's talk about innovation and how it drives into an organization. This has been my career, driving change into organizations. And I use the analogy of an electric circuit. And really, simply, the innovators, the agents of change, let's think of them as the power source on this circuit. We model the organization as the resistive load. Every organization operates stably through routine practices that are commonly understood. Innovation necessarily disrupts those routines. New procedures, new technology, they have to be adjusted to. And the resistance to change is there to protect the stability of the organization. If you have innovation levels coming in at a controlled level, introduced properly with pilot projects and getting the kinks worked out before pushing widespread adoption, then the organization is going to advance while remaining productive. But if you switch these and you're driving very high levels of change into an organization, it is just going to burn out. And that is exactly what we saw during the pandemic. Students, how were they going to form peer-level communities, project teams, study groups? Faculty, administrators, and IT organizations had to make it up as they went along. All manner of changes in policies and procedures and capital equipment requirements. And professors, well, they were often left to their own devices, figuring out how to deliver lectures and safeguard the integrity of their evaluations. It was an awful lot of churn, and there's an awful lot of burnout as a result. I'll take a moment to describe my collaborations and interactions during the pandemic and a few case studies, what I observed in the professorial community. In the spring of 2020, I put together a really simple YouTube video. It's about 40 minutes long, and it walked through the technology that you could use to create a pretty solid online lecture product while not being terribly expensive. I invited professors to work with me and that I'd be happy to help them out, advise and support them, and help with some technology skills transfer, stuff like that. The first and probably most intensive interaction I had was with Professor Roseanne Devlin. She had already been using a Microsoft Surface Pen tablet in class for lectures, so the goal was to boost her game for online lecture delivery, both async and synchronous. What resulted was a pretty technical setup, and she is not, with emphasis, a technology person. In fact, she's quite anxious about it, so there was a lot of skills development, coaching, and support required to get her self-sufficient, and in the end, mission accomplished. But the way she describes her pandemic experience was that she was very happy with the quality of her lectures and got a lot of positive student feedback, but student engagement was poor despite her efforts, and in the end, she had to invest a lot of time and effort in testing integrity. And this is the big issue that keeps coming up from everyone: testing integrity, testing integrity, testing integrity. One of the innovations that she came up with was doing a watermark of her exam materials. A lot of the sites that were taking posts of the exams and providing answers would claim, well, we didn't know this was an exam. So she made it very clear that these were exam materials, and she thinks she managed to bring down the frequency of those kinds of posts occurring. She didn't feel the organization supported her as well as she needed. And I think that's a pretty common feeling. But as I said at the beginning, the administration was facing its own stresses as well. It was a war zone. Professor Karnasova is one of the organizers of this session and a colleague of mine. I serve as the public speaking coach for the Governor's Challenge team, which is a competitive speaking team in the Department of Economics. While I helped her a bit with her setup, mostly the focus was as a contributor to the course and how to best optimize for the students. There's an awful lot of economics to cover in this course, and at the same time, there's the sidecar of the presentation coaching. So I take a lot of that out of class via asynchronously delivered lectures and extra hours coaching, either one-on-one or in small groups with the students. So that makes me walk the walk on a lot of this stuff. Professor Leslie Scheel had, prior to the pandemic, already been teaching a flipped class. He had a pen tablet, and he had already recorded Mathematical Economics 1 several years ago, and he was providing those lectures asynchronously with synchronous problem solving in class. The recordings were dated, however, and we updated his recording setup and boosted the quality of the lecture recordings with some video editing. And he was happy with the quality of the lectures, garnering very positive student feedback, and his lectures are being used in multiple sections of the course by other professors, using the same flipped format. He also made a heavy investment in randomized testing structures, question banks that could be drawn from for tests, and it was a lot of upfront investment, but the benefits are accruing over time. My brother, Pat Heffernan, is a professor at the Royal Military College in Kingston. He's formerly the Vice Principal Research and Dean of Graduate Studies. In this domain, he's easily as technical as I am, and so our interaction tended to take the form of peer interaction, comparing notes and trying to get a sense of what worked well. He had already been teaching an online course in project management as part of an MBA program. And during the pandemic, he kitted out a very extensive setup, which included a large Surface Studio 24-inch pen system, green screens, lights, microphones, the works. He converted all of his classes to the flipped format, with the class time focused on Q&A. And he posted lectures to YouTube, including supplemental material like how to use Word for graduate authoring of papers, MathCAD, project management software, and so on. He mandated that all his engineering students have a pen-capable device so that they could use that for interactive whiteboarding in class, help sessions, and on tests. All exams are proctored using a webcam that can see the student's surroundings, the computer screen, any written materials, everything. Prior to the pandemic, Professor Andrew Lowe of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology was online after a fashion. He had a course that he had delivered in the classroom, recorded and posted as part of MIT's open courseware offerings. This was, again, more of a peer-to-peer interaction. I had an opportunity to interview him last year, and we compared notes on lecture techniques and lecture technology, and I followed him as a best practice leader ever since. He was very dissatisfied with the quality of the product that he provided in the spring of 2020, and he made very significant investments in equipment and skills in the summer of 2020, and I believe I'm pretty safe in claiming him to be one of the best-in-class online lecturers in the world, in my opinion, but I think I'm on safe ground. He published a paper, The World of EdCraft, Challenges and Opportunities in Synchronous Online Teaching, with co-authors, and they have each provided individual case studies in addition to the original paper. He has also recorded online videos describing his studio setup and his techniques, which are well worth taking in. I'm well aware that most of those here gathered care more about the testing integrity problem than online lecturing techniques at this point. But I do want to give this a mention because there are a few things that you can do to increase student engagement and the quality of the lectures. I use an acronym, the 3 V's, in my coaching of the Governor's Challenge team to describe the major pillars of public speaking technique. The very first and most important is voice. The voice carries the narrative and must be clear, comprehensible, and expressive. In the online context, you need to control for background noise and other auditory distractions. An audience will tune out a speaker very quickly if they encounter a monotone delivery, scratchy sound, lots of room, reverb, interruptions from pets, etc. Visage is the face and the body. That's your visual presence. When in person, you're standing in front of a blackboard, but online, you are a broadcaster. You have to think in terms of your camera and lighting and background as playing a role in establishing your identity and enhancing your presence. Visuals are the last supporting element, but in an academic setting, a great deal of the content is actually in the visuals, be they provided by slides or a whiteboard. That material is usually the main occupant of the screen, as it is here. In the lecture hall, we switch between these constantly. We go up to the blackboard, we're writing, everybody looks at the blackboard. We turn around, we address the class, they're looking at our face. Online, there are ways of switching students' focus from one to the other, but new techniques and technologies need to be applied. So my top 5 recommendations for online lecturing. Well, my number 1 online lecturing tip is to have a pen or a stylus input device. This will give you the ability to whiteboard or blackboard while you voice over the work you're doing. You can annotate slides as you're going, and if you're familiar with Khan Academy, the visuals are just an interactive blackboard and he works through problems on the blackboard and voices them over. It works well, it's dynamic, it's always moving, something's always changing. Sal Khan also has really good voice technique. I would recommend you get a good directional microphone. It doesn't have to be super expensive. I usually use a Blue Yeti, and it's much better than a typical onboard microphone of most machines and webcams. And because it has a cardioid directional pattern, it eliminates a lot of room noise. You can also augment noise removal with something like Crisp AI, which actually removes transients from children and pets. Ideally, you want to integrate your visage and your visuals. This presentation was formatted for in-person delivery, But by way of example, if I want to insert myself into the presentation to make some commentary, I can do that. There are a number of technologies that can do this. Open broadcast software, aka OBS, Camtasia, and a new feature in PowerPoint called Cameo that can bring your webcam right into your slides. Another recommendation is to use multiple monitors. This is helpful when working normally. I tend to have the task at hand on my main monitor, materials I am referring to in another, and communication tools like email, Teams, or Slack in a third. When recording an asynchronous lecture, you need at least two: the pen input for the material that you are presenting, and another for the recording control software. For synchronous lectures, you add a third for the class itself, so you can see the students, chat messages, and pending questions. Finally, put a little bit of effort into your setting. It can be as simple as draping a piece of black cloth behind you if you don't have a room that is well suited as a setting. One thing the pandemic brought us was subject matter experts dialing in as guests on TV, some with truly awful lighting and surroundings. It's distracting and, in my opinion, unprofessional, similarly for lecturing. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. We all care very deeply about the credibility of the marks and credentials that we issue as an educational institution. There's always been a bit of an arms race on this, but I think unethical students won during the pandemic. YouTube has dozens of videos up on how to cheat on online exams, and commercial ventures that have been set up to support cheating by hiring people to help you answer questions live in real time. So it's a very difficult problem. It is important to note that academic institutions are not alone in facing this problem. Private retraining institutions and corporate certification exams are other examples. There are techniques that can be employed to make cheating difficult. Randomization is reasonably well known. You can randomize the selection of questions so that each student gets a unique mix from a question bank, and you can change up the order of questions to complicate cross-referencing, and you can vary the input parameters on some problem sets, so, for example, changing the coefficients on equations such that the solutions are different. Another technique makes use of time constraints. This is particularly true for commercial exam testing. While restricting the time window that the exam can be taken in is a de facto practice in academia, restricting the time allocated to a specific section or question is an option, although that does undermine a student's ability to strategize how much time they want to spend on what questions in the exam. Combined with randomizing the question order for different students, it can hamper collaborative cheating efforts. Oral exams are labor-intensive, but they can be used to follow up with students, particularly where there is some doubt about their results. Online proctoring is emerging as a predominant expectation for online examinations. I know there was some pushback from the student community, invasion of privacy and such, but I think going forward, particularly now that there is the option to take the exams in person, that is not going to be so much of an issue. A detachable webcam is a key component, which is used for pre-exam site inspections, scanning under the table, under the keyboard, behind the monitor. Then the webcam is placed such that it can see the exam site and participant, not just their face. And you need a microphone because there are documented techniques, courtesy of our helpful friends on YouTube, whereby you use earbuds with a hat and a phone in the next room to access audio help on the exam. Another component is a lockable and keystroke logging browser that prevents task switching and unauthorized machine-based communications. I'm also going to throw in Roseanne Devlin's technique of watermarking the exam materials. It's not part of the literature that I've seen, but copyright takedown notices under DMCA are required by law to be acted on expeditiously, and I think this technique can reduce the prevalence of online posted material. One problem that Leslie Shield posed to me was the written paper exam, which applies to most engineering, mathematics, and economic exams. The question response may require graphing and diagramming, so you're using a pen to write your answers. You can't just type it in. The current procedure, as described to me, has students writing their response on paper, taking a photo of the exam paper with their phone, which they then transmit to the examiner and, well, of course, all their friends as well. So when Dr. Shield raised this with me, my immediate response was, well, use a pen tablet to enter the response directly into the secure environment of the exam. The technology pieces required certainly exist and are cost effective, although I'm not sure this approach is integrated into the tools currently used by the University of Ottawa, but there are no feasibility barriers. So how do you solve testing integrity? Currently, enforcing testing integrity requires an enormous amount of time on the part of the teaching professor. And while transaction costs may be bearable when cheating is relatively rare, on online exams, cheating has become much more prevalent. The costs involved make enforcement arduous and necessarily infrequent, and dilute the deterrent effects of enforcement. There are opportunities for automation, the equivalent of an academic speed camera, and streamlined processes. A quick Google search turns up a number of papers on the subject, so I'm sure machine learning and other techniques will emerge and be available as software features sooner than later. Not every professor is going to sift through the online videos and web pages describing techniques on how to cheat online or know how to issue a DMCA enforcement request, nor should they. To be effective at scale, the testing integrity system is going to have to be restructured. I would suggest that an integrity center of excellence, staffed by specialists in testing integrity, is the right approach. This serves as a service to the academic programs so that professors are not left completely to their individual efforts in enforcing the integrity of their testing. This is analogous to the IT security team. They know how to configure firewalls and keep viruses off machines and configure secure data stores to defend privacy rights. These are specialists that support other IT staff and are members of a global community and infrastructure that spans organizations, sharing emerging threats and best practices, what the black hats are doing and what the white hats can do in response. It's an ongoing arms race, and I expect online cheating to be much the same. Speaking of global communities you might consider joining, I'll draw your attention to edX, a consortium of over 160 universities founded by the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and Harvard University, which has been offering online education for 10 years and has some impressive enrollment statistics and baked-in technology platforms and baked-in procedures to make those the delivery of those products work well. And there's a Canadian presence as well. By way of a call to action, here are my recommendations on how to get there from here. How to build a constructive and scalable remote distance online educational capacity for the future. I'll start by identifying the strengths and weaknesses of the current state, the skills acquired, and the issues uncovered. I've talked about them a bit, but I think there's a lot more fact-finding and testing of the waters to do to uncover what's working and what isn't. It's critical to reset the pace of the innovation feed into the organization to a manageable level. Burning out the organization with constant changes is not helpful. So engage your early adopters who are keen and participate in trial projects and minimize the churn for others and let them recover. Focus on optional programs like summer school, for example. The optionality can enable a more forceful insistence on proctored exams. The trials should focus on identifying best practices in all aspects of the problem, including the physical capital, training, and support structures that are needed for a scalable program. And at that point in time, you're able to establish a viable online offering for the long run. So, at any rate, thanks for taking in this asynchronous version of Tuesday's Brown Bag session. And if you want to get in touch with me, feel free to email or phone, and take care.